We see President Trump now approaching the podium at the Pentagon. Let's listen.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Before we begin, let me express the horror and grief so many Americans at the heinous assassination of Charlie Kirk have felt. Charlie was a giant of his generation, a champion of liberty, and an inspiration to millions and millions of people. Our prayers are with his wonderful wife, Eric, and his beautiful children. Fantastic people they are. We miss him greatly, yet I have no doubt that Charlie's voice and the courage he put into the hearts of countless people, especially young people, will live on. I'm pleased to announce that I will soon be awarding Charlie Kirk posthumously the Presidential Medal of Freedom. The date of the ceremony will be announced, and I can only guarantee you one thing, that we will have a very big crowd. Very, very big.
President Trump has ordered all flags throughout the U.S. to be lowered to half-mast after the shooting death of Turning Point USA founder Charlie Kirk at an event in Utah just yesterday. The president says, quote, "No one understood or had the hearts of the youth in the United States of America better than Charlie." Let's bring in CBS News White House reporter Olivia Rinaldi for much more on this. Olivia, thank you for joining us today. The president released a video statement after Kirk's death. Can you break down what he had to say?
Yeah, Mugo, last night, President Trump releasing this video about Charlie Kirk, who was a close personal friend of his. It was about a 4-minute video where the president remembered the life of Kirk and gave his condolences to his family, his wife Erica, and his 2 very young children. The president also talked about the rising political violence in the country. He blamed the radical left for this rising violence and said that the radical left have compared wonderful Americans like Charlie to Nazis. The president went on to say this rhetoric is directly responsible for the terrorism that we're seeing here in our country today, and it must stop right now. The president went on to say that they will bring everyone who was involved in this murder to justice. We know they're still pursuing, the FBI is still pursuing the suspect in this case. The president also spoke about Charlie Kirk today at the 9/11 memorial at the Pentagon, where he just spoke. And he said there that he will give Charlie Kirk the Presidential Medal of Freedom following his death. So quite notable there. Mugo.
And we know Kirk was very close with the president. What was their relationship like?
Well, he was almost like a son to President Trump. They were extremely close from his first administration. When President Trump left office, Charlie Kirk was one of the organizers who stayed with him, often going to Mar-a-Lago, meeting with the president. And then, of course, when the 2024 campaign picked back up, Kirk was such a trusted advisor of this administration and the campaign. They were such a small, tight-knit group. I mean, it was a small but mighty campaign team, but they trusted Charlie Kirk enough to really give him a place on that campaign, and that was to reach out to young voters, mid-propensity voters, and that means voters who are likely to vote but maybe just haven't made a plan to yet. So those were the voters that Charlie Kirk was tasked with going to really secure for the president. But beyond just his role as a political advocate, he was friends with Don Jr. He was friends with Eric Trump, with Lara Trump. He was very close with the family. He was very, very close with Vice President Vance. He actually was one of the people who advocated for President Trump to pick J.D. Vance to be his vice president. And, you know, during the transition, Charlie Kirk was often the person in the room telling President Trump who he should hire for specific roles. He literally sat right next to Susie Wiles, who was the chief of staff, and helped make some of those decisions. He was very well known throughout this administration. And Mugo, yesterday when this horrific news came through, I was speaking with several administration officials who were just expressing shock and awe and anger and just deep, deep hurt over this. So it's not just the relationship with President Trump, but he really reverberated through the entire administration. And it's certainly a loss that they feel today.
Yeah, certainly. Olivia Rinaldi, thank you so much for joining us today. Now let's bring in CBS News congressional correspondent Nicole Killian. Nicole, thank you for your time. How are congressional lawmakers reacting to Kirk's death this morning?
Well, there certainly has been bipartisan outpourings of condolences and sympathy for Charlie Kirk's family and just the overall situation. You know, universally, many members of Congress here are condemning political violence, saying that it has no place. That being said, I did a short time ago speak with Democratic leaders Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries, and I asked them to respond to President Trump's comments yesterday. Of course, President Trump was, as you just discussed, really close ally and friend of Charlie Kirk, spoke very highly of him as he mourned his death yesterday, but he also heaped blame for some of this on the so-called radical left. So I asked Leader Jeffries and Schumer's their thoughts on the president's comments. Take a listen.
Violence, which affects so many different people of so many different political persuasions, is an affliction of America. And coming together is what we ought to be doing, not pointing fingers of blame.
This moment requires leadership that brings the American people together as opposed to trying to further divide us. Political violence in any form against any American is unacceptable.
So again, as you hear both leaders, they're condemning the killing of Charlie Kirk, but also saying, look, this really isn't the time for finger pointing. Speaker Johnson, even a short time ago, also issued calls to lower the temperature, to dial things down. So that does seem to be the sentiment among many lawmakers here today. Obviously, many of them, too, certainly concerned about their own security as well. In the wake of this incident, we know threats against members of Congress have only increased in recent years, so that certainly remains top of mind for many of them as well.
And Nicole, we were talking to Olivia before we came to you, and she mentioned how Kirk was close with President Trump. But I want to ask you about what he meant to the GOP and even young conservatives.
Well, obviously, he was very influential and very impactful, had millions of followers on social media, had a podcast, did all of these tours on college campuses, was certainly very instrumental in helping to drive turnout for President Trump in the 2024 presidential contest. I even went to a few of the rallies that were held by his organization, Turning Point USA, and they were always, packed and full of a lot of energy. So that is something certainly that he is being remembered for, and that the president and many lawmakers here on Capitol Hill appreciated about him, just the vigor that he brought to the conservative movement, that willingness to have debates with people, whether you agree or disagree with their viewpoint. And he had a very close relationship, too, with many lawmakers here on Capitol Hill, some of them appearing on his podcast. In fact, Senator Mike Lee of Utah said he was just texting with Charlie Kirk about his visit to Utah before this tragic incident occurred. So it certainly is weighing heavy on many lawmakers here on Capitol Hill.
Nicole Killian on Capitol Hill for us today. Thank you. Breaking moments ago, officials tell CBS News the casket of conservative activist Charlie Kirk will be flown from Utah to Arizona on board Air Force Two. Kirk was a close friend of both President Donald Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance. He has even been credited with telling the president he should pick Vance for the role. Now, in a lengthy post honoring his late friend, the VP says in part, Charlie Kirk was a true friend, the kind of guy you could say anything to and know it would always stay with him. Also important to note, Vance canceled his 9/11 travel plans today to visit Kirk's family instead. Let's bring in CBS News Executive Director of White House and Politics, Fin Gomez. Fin, thank you for joining us. What did Charlie Kirk mean to Vance and to the president as well? And to the Republican Party, too. So many people just talking about how he was a great guy.
Well, look, Charlie Kirk and Vice President Vance are very close. As you mentioned, Mugo, he's close with the president and also the vice president. But with Vance, it goes back. It goes back to 2021, when Vance was considering a Senate run in his home state of Ohio. One of the first people that he reached out to was Charlie Kirk. And Charlie Kirk has been a longtime advocate, really since then, for Vice President Vance. In fact, last year, If you recall, Mugo, when there was the Veep stakes, when there was that run-up to the Republican National Convention, and the president was deciding who to pick to be his running mate, Charlie Kirk was a big advocate for Vance in that particular process, and a main reason that he was picked, according to sources close to that process that I spoke to. He's also been very close to the president, as I said. Many Republicans and many Trump advisors that I've spoken to since Charlie Kirk's assassination yesterday have told me that they point and they credit Kirk with the president in his campaign doing so well with Generation Z voters last year. Now, Turning Point USA, that is the political organization that Charlie Kirk co-founded back in 2012. It's bigger than just MAGA youth activist group. It's bigger than that. It really has. It helped in many ways take the place of the RNC in trying to mobilize Republican voters and using new methods, including new media, social media, to really try to propel the president's campaign last year. And if you recall, also amongst Generation Z voters, Trump did very well, gaining a majority actually of young white male voters in last year's election. And again, many of those close to Trump that I spoke to credit Charlie Kirk with that accomplishment.
And Finn, so let's dig in deeper into that. Why is that? What is it about Charlie Kirk that got those young people, especially those young male white voters, to turn to President Trump when it came to voting on the ballot box?
Muga, that's a fantastic question. And actually, before this, I spoke to a Gen Z expert who told me that in part it was because in the aftermath of the pandemic, there was this sense by many within that demographic, the Gen Z demographic, who felt that there was a overregulation during that time. If you recall, a lot of their academic careers were stopped, right? They had, they were in college and they had to come out, and there was like Zooms, and there was a sense now post that experience that there was a sense of being against overregulation, and I think Charlie Kirk really tapped into that. He also tapped into some topics that were that caused controversy, including race, including on the argument and discourse on various issues that were controversial. However, he also had a lot of support, and you could see that. I mean, in his 3-hour daily show that he had on YouTube called The Charlie Kirk Show, he had a big following, and just on social media alone. I mean, Gen Z voters, Gen Z audience members really have been affected by Charlie Kirk. Some of my colleagues told us that they first heard about this killing because of their kids or younger folks they knew who got the news from social media. So I think his ability to utilize that medium was very effective, not just for President Trump, but the Republican Party as a whole.
Yeah. Finn Gomez, thank you so much for your time today.